This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, I'm definitely feeling that post-workout fatigue. You haven't worked out in 6 days and now your body needs time to readjust fatigue. You know, it's weird. When you get out of that habit of consistency, it's hard to get right back into it. But I'll be working on the extra gains this week. You can bet on that. It's good to know that I actually still have the motivation to work out. I wish more people in the wrestling business today had the same mentality. Maybe some of them could actually look like grown adults. Instead, they all look like Weenie Yuta. So, well, I didn't prepare a very extensive intro today, so I'll get into the plugs and we can get into the show as planned. You are tuning into the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. You know, at the time I'm recording this, I did hear about the recent passing of Sabu this past weekend. I haven't really had the time to prepare a tribute speech or anything, so maybe I'll save some of that for the Monday show if I have time. Like, I don't want to just gloss over it and be passive about it. At the same time, I don't want to share like 2 minutes of thoughts and then move on with the show. It's a pretty big deal, and it warrants a semi-lengthy discussion. You know, people are still trying to get answers on exactly what happened. The news is so recent. But I'll have some extra time this weekend because we only have the Retro Raw recap to do. So that'll give me a chance to weigh in and share at least a handful of Sabu memories that I have. But for now, we will get into the wrestling reports. Well, it's the week after WrestleWar. Try saying that 10 times fast. We obviously covered the pros and cons of the pay-per-view last week when we recapped it. The show Fallout was going to be very heavily focused on the Flair Funk angle. We got the injury update from Jim Ross right at the top of the program. Flair suffered a ruptured disc and a compressed vertebrae after being pow-driven on the announce table. Still no timeline in the return, but it is interesting how they decided, even in knowing Flair was going to be out of action for a period of time, it wasn't the World Heavyweight title that was being held up in a tournament. It was the tag titles that were being held up. Specifically the World Tag Belts. And that obviously stems from the situation we saw where the Road Warriors wrestled Dr. Death and Mike Rotunda. They somehow roped Nikita Koloff into being the special guest referee for reasons that were never clarified. And after the other two Varsity Club members pulled Nikita out of the ring and started beating him up at ringside, the match was thrown out and rolled a DQ victory for the Road Warriors. But the belts still needed to be vacated for whatever reason. It was never really explained well. In fact, it wasn't explained at all. I guess the logic being, since the heels tried to fuck over the baby faces a second time, management finally stepped up and took charge. You'll keep in mind, this is following the incident where Teddy Long fast counted the Road Warriors and screwed them out of the belts in the first place. So while JR's going over all that, Paulie dangerously crashes the set and starts putting over the Samoans. And since they have been on a path of destruction as of late, he's issuing a challenge on behalf of Samu and Fatu. They want the Road Warriors in round 1 next week. It's their chance to solidify themselves as the best tag team in the NWA. They want the best competition they can get their hands on. Which is admirable, sure. Keep in mind, this is the same tag team that just lost clean to the dynamic fucking dudes on pay-per-view a week ago. Probably shouldn't be coming out riding their high horse right about now. From there, we go to the ring for Ranger Ross versus the Great Muta. I love this fucking ringside shot they got during Muta's entrance. The one singular mark that tried to run up and shit-talk Muta from behind the barricade. Meanwhile, everybody else is sitting there applauding him as he's making his entrance. I'm sure that guy made 0 friends at center stage that week. I don't know what the hell was going on here, but Ranger Ross was really, really sloppy in this match. He just couldn't do anything right offensively here. There was a really awkward miscue spot where he tried to hit the ropes and make a comeback on Muta. I think Ross was supposed to miss a diving crossbody attempt, but he ended up accidentally landing on Muta anyway. At the same time, he also couldn't figure out how to properly hit the ropes. I mean, other than Ross's poor performance here, the only other thing to know was the fact that the crowd was cheering Muta like crazy. And at the end, he blew red mist into the air and hit Ross with a moonsault with a pin. If I'm being accurate, he actually overshot the moonsault because Ross wasn't in position for it. But I'm not going to give him shit for that. The rapid regression of Ranger Ross in the NWA is stunning. Like, he started off moderately okay. Then he was getting noticeably worse in every match. Now it's like first week in training school bad. I don't know what happened, but I think Ranger Ross may have gotten inside his own head. So from there, they replayed the heat angle from WrestleWar where Funk had attacked Flair after the match with Steamboat. And now it's time to get the scoop from Mr. Funk firsthand. The why Terry why explanation. Why did he attack Ric Flair and lay him out last week? Well, Funk had his moment to rationalize, and it was certainly a Terry Funk promo. First, he explained that Ric Flair had the audacity to say that Terry wasn't a contender. He saw the hate in Flair's eyes when he went to shake his hand and call him the champ. And all Funk did was beat him to the punch. And while Flair was down groveling in pain, Funk saw him turn yellow, just like his bleached blonde hair. So for all the simple-minded people that can't see it from Funk's perspective, Well, now they can. He can now stand here and claim that he's the better man. There's not a doctor in the world that's ever going to be able to revive Flair's career. It should be noted during all this, there was a good portion of the crowd that was cheering Funk. So, I think we were definitely dealing with a smarter crowd this week. I obviously can't do Terry Funk promos justice by recapping them. If you've never heard a Terry promo in person, I mean, you got to go search one out just to hear the inflection. It's a very similar comparison to somebody like a Macho Man or a Steve Austin or even a Ric Flair, if we're trying to compare apples to apples. Like, once you hear that tone and that delivery, you know almost immediately it's a Terry Funk promo. He just had that tonal articulation that made him stand out above so many other talkers in the business. Absolutely great promo. I mean, it's clearly supposed to be a heel promo, despite the people weren't necessarily booing him here. And he did drop the word quit. He said that Flair quit last week when Funk got the better of him. So there's your teaser for down the road when we get the epic I Quit match. That took us to the returning fabulous Freebirds wrestling the team of Lee Scott and Cougar J. And I am referring to the two original members of the group. So no Jimmy Garvin as of this point. It's Terry Bam Bam Gordy and Michael P.S. Hayes. And we also had an inset promo from Lex Luger where he was reflecting on losing the U.S. Heavyweight Championship to Michael Hayes at the pay-per-view last week. It was kind of difficult to hear two-thirds of the thing because they were playing Bad Street over the loudspeakers while Luger was in the middle of talking. But he basically alluded to a heel turn without being super direct about it. So that he's tired of playing by the rules and doing what's right. The only thing he's focused on right now is getting his belt back. So remember when I mentioned how I had no idea how Luger turned heel right before the summer of '89? Apparently it was as simple as, I'm done being a nice guy. Well, there's a life lesson most guys could learn from. Quit trying to play by the rules. It gets you nowhere in life. Now, Gordy obviously made his return at WrestleWar to help Hayes win the U.S. strap. And he had dropped a considerable amount of weight by this point in his career. He was still a big burly dude. But man, go back and watch tapes of him when we reviewed World Class back in 82, 83, even 84. He was much bigger back then. I still maintain the opinion that he ranks among the top 5 best big men athletes in wrestling. Maybe even top 2 or 3. He never did moonsaults like Bam Bam Bigelow or Vader. But that guy could move. He was such a remarkable athlete for his size. The match only went a few minutes, but Gordy got to shine here. And after the Freebirds won, sticking with the theme of this week's Superstation taping, smart fans cheering all the bad guys and being relatively apathetic to most of the baby faces. You get Hayes trying to cut a heel promo on Luger and telling the fans to shut up. Meanwhile, they're cheering him. And he essentially challenged Luger to a Bad Street match because he wants to finish what he started at WrestleWar. He wants to beat Luger from pillar to post and end his career. He's never lost a bad street match. It's his home turf. And he's confident that he could put Luger out of commission for good. They also talked a little about the World Tag Team Tournament, which Hayes and Gordy are going to be a part of. It basically boiled down to them talking about the Samoans and the Road Warriors and completely ignoring all the other tag teams in the NWA, which is kind of sad when the Midnight Express didn't even get a plug here, despite them being written off of television and storyline. But that was that. Hayes also declared this day the greatest day in the history of wrestling. I have no idea why. It was certainly not the greatest day in the history of wrestling. Not to try and burst his bubble. We then had a quick highlight reel of all 5 title bouts from the pay-per-view. They also had a graphic on the lower third that mentioned that the show is currently available on video cassette, which did not help in making me seem any younger. Come to think of it, I never actually owned a VHS copy of WrestleWar 89. Which kind of seems weird. I have a lot of classic WCW tapes, but I do not own a physical copy of WrestleWar, and I don't believe I ever have. I'm sure if I wanted one, I could go to eBay and find some listings at overpriced charges. In any case, we talked about the World Tag Belts being held up at the beginning of the review. Jim Herd attempted to explain the situation. He sounded more like he was being held at gunpoint, trying to recite scripted verbiage. But he eventually talked about the fact that the Varsity Club are being reprimanded for attacking an official, even though the official was Nikita Koloff. And so they are holding a tournament with, and this is a direct quote, 8 of the best tag teams in the NWA. Okay. Well, that's a pretty big deal, right? I could have easily made a joke that the NWA barely had 8 tag teams by this point. And they almost lost the Midnight Express until JR coaxed Jim Cornette into re-signing. So, here are the 8 best tag teams in the NWA, according to Jim Herd. The Road Warriors, the Fabulous Freebirds, who literally returned on pay-per-view 1 week ago and only wrestled 1 television match. The New Zealand Militia, who we've never seen and have never been given any reason to care about. That's Jack Victory and Rib Morgan, for anybody wondering. I think we're yet to see them actually wrestle on television. The Dynamic Dudes, which is laughable on its face. The Midnight Express, Butch Reed and Cowboy Bob Orton, who have never teamed together, the Samoans, and Ranger Ross and Ron Simmons. Again, 2 men we've never seen tag together. Those are the current 8 best tag teams in WCW. Remember when this company had kick-ass tag programs the Midnight Rock and Roll, Midnight Fantastics, Horsemen Road Warriors. Then you still had tag teams like Barry Windham and Ronnie Garvin, Dusty and Nikita, Sting and Luger. Yeah, that was like 2 or 3 years ago. It's crazy how quickly the business can change. And not in a good way. So following that announcement, Kevin Sullivan interrupted to pitch a fit. And this was epically horrible. He's trying to explain that the Varsity Club are getting screwed over, mostly in the fact that they're not in the tournament despite them being the former champions. But instead of talking about that, Sullivan's out there getting all tongue-tied, trying to preach about the top 8 Ivy League colleges in the country, and how most of the top athletes aren't academically smart enough to go to any other major university. And he's just going in circles, talking for what seemingly had to have been hours. And I'm sitting there like, what the fuck is he rambling about? I think Jim Ross summed it up best when he just finally cut him off and went, "Are you finished?" Because that is precisely what I was thinking. Are you finished rambling about nonsensical shit that nobody could possibly care about? He also touched on the Ric Flair Terry Funk angle and said Flair's the greatest world champion, but he insulted Funk and deserved what he got. Hey, that was at least coherent. And we then came back for another tremendously awful segment. Not because of who was talking, but because of what it's setting up in a couple weeks. More bad gimmick ideas. So Teddy Long is joining JR for an interview. And keep in mind, I have to keep bringing this up. The story is that Teddy Long is still unemployed. He was fired by Jim Herd for being a biased referee. He deliberately fucked over the Road Warriors and cost them the World Tag Belts. Yet, he's still on the show. He's just coming out for interview segments every week like nothing's wrong. Is he fired or is he not? Why is this so fucking complicated? If he's fired, then he shouldn't be on television. If he's not fired, then just tell us that. Say that he was reinstated. Funny enough, that wasn't even the part that pissed me off. So, he's out there talking about how he was wrongfully terminated. Jim Herd attempting to get rid of him. But Teddy wants to make it clear that he's still here and he has major plans. Just like the guy in this pre-tape we saw them air. And I'm talking about none other than Norman the Lunatic. Good fucking Lord, this rotten-ass Jim Herd gimmick concept. Yes, Norman the Lunatic is coming, people. Translation, Bastion Booger, for all you WWF fanatics, and or Friar Ferguson, if you actually remember that brief stint before he became Bastion Booger. He literally was the true definition of the man of 1,000 gimmicks. And 999 of them were terrible. His real name was Mike Shaw. I don't even know how many people really know the backstory to Shaw's career. He'd gotten his start in wrestling almost 10 years prior to this in Canada, where I think he wrestled under a couple different names in the Calgary area. The most notable probably was when he worked as Mockin' Singh, which was not a particularly great gimmick either, but it was miles better than Norman the Lunatic and or Bastion fucking Booger. But he did wrestle a lot of top names in the Calgary area before he came over here to the States in '89. And we're talking guys like Owen and Brett, Davey Boy, Benoit. I think he got to work with Don Morocco at one point. And he was always a big guy. But back in his earlier career, he was at least mobile to an extent. You know, by the time he went to work for Vince in '93, he was essentially viewed as morbidly obese, which is how Vince got the inspiration for that rotten booger gimmick. I honestly don't even know what the thought process was with the Norman gimmick. I've heard the stories over the years that it was an attempt to try to appeal to younger kids, since Herd was basically obsessed with trying to make WCW more family-friendly. And even in that sense, it doesn't add up originally, because Norman was supposed to be a heel at first. I think they later on turned him face when they did get the idea that he could be someone that appealed to a younger market. Of course, that fell flat. And his pre-tape promo here was actually not half bad, despite the hideously awful material he was given. The guy could actually talk. That's the sad thing. But again, it's like all the other gimmicks he was saddled with on national stages. Nobody was ever going to get that shit over. This is a dead-in-the-water gimmick from day one. Of course, it didn't last all that long before they dropped it. And I think later on, didn't he become a truck driver or something? You know, just more attempts at career sabotage. That's all it really boils down to. I could go on about all of Herd's bad ideas, but I don't want to get lost in the weeds here. Our next match is Tom Branch and Dwayne Bruce versus the Road Warriors, which lasted about 15 seconds. Then they went up to the interview station to do a really passionate promo about being the best tag team in the world, how they got screwed out of their belts, and they plan on making the Samoans look like a pile of human waste when they get through with them. It was fine. I kind of tuned out the part where Hawk was talking about comic strips because, admittedly, I did not quite get the reference to Beetle Bailey. That was a little before my time. But he was apparently a badass in Hawk's mind. So I take it he was a cool superhero. You know, it's funny, I just envision Hawk in the locker room reading comic books while he and Animal are snorting crack and just being raging out of control lunatics. All the while, Hawk's just in the corner, casually reading comics. Anyway, the TV main event. It's Scott Steiner taking on Kevin Sullivan. I guess this would technically mark the official in-ring debut for Scotty, wouldn't it? We've seen him a couple times in Ric's corner for big title matches, but yeah, I think this was Scott's first official match on TV. And it was kind of neat with how they set it up. You know, they did the injury angle at WrestleWar where the Varsity Club ran Ric's shoulder into the ring post. So he was off selling that. And his brother was here to wrestle on his behalf and get some revenge on the heels for what they did. It's weird seeing Scott wrestle in regular ring trunks as opposed to the amateur singlet. One thing you'll probably hear me mention a lot as we go through the Steiner timeline, Scotty was in great shape. Jacked to the gills. But this was absolutely pre-Big Papa Pump era Scott Steiner. So he looked reasonably jacked here in '89 as opposed to unhealthy and ginormous like he was by, say, the late 90s, early 2000s. Having Sullivan out there as a dance partner was good because he did a really good job walking Scott through this and making his shit look good. He gave Steiner the shine early on, cut him off in the middle so he could sell for a bit. Then they get to the spot where Scotty tries to charge Sullivan in the corner, but accidentally posts himself. And as Sullivan goes to roll up Scotty for the pin, he initially gets the win. But as the heels try to immediately target Scott's arm after the bell with a chair, Nick Patrick reverses the decision and awards the match to Scott instead. Didn't really take a whole lot of effort to overturn the call, but it will go down in the record books as a win for Scott Steiner. And, you know, we could talk about how Scotty was very green by this point. Keeping it on the shorter side was probably a smart move. But I had no problem with this. And that left us with a few minutes of remaining airtime to see Terry Funk get in a quick squash with Troy Aldridge. Well, it was supposed to be a squash, but it didn't pan out that way. We also had a pre-tape promo from Ricky Steamboat, just kind of reflecting on the match with Flair from WrestleWar. And he's now issuing a challenge to all the top contenders in the NWA. He wants to go after the belt, but he also recognizes that he needs to prove himself just like everybody else. And that is what he's willing to do in order to get back into title contention. At this stage, pretty much all the top babyfaces are putting Flair over. So against Flair's better judgment, he is now effectively the top babyface by default. I'm sure he would have tried to argue against it, but that's how it comes across as a viewer. So this is great. Funk gets on the house mic beforehand and starts going off on Flair one more time, bitching and griping that Flair doesn't consider him a contender right now because he hasn't earned that position. So Funk is going to start from the bottom of the barrel and work his way to the top. He's going to wrestle the least experienced worker he can find and then gradually move up the ladder to stronger competition. And boy, howdy, did he certainly make an example out of this poor chap. Standing there just berating poor Aldridge, asking if he really wants to wrestle Funk. And as he's slapping him around and trying to make a mockery of him, eventually Aldridge just decides that he wants nothing to do with Funk. And then Funk goads him into getting back in the ring so he can fake him out with a handshake and beat the tar out of him. So So if we ever see Troy Aldridge again, we can basically certify him as the world's biggest dweeb. I liked how as they were wrapping the show up, you saw Funk give the guy the pile driver on the outside mat. Then they immediately cut to the end credits right after the pile driver spot. Guy probably has a broken neck. But folks, that's all we have time for this week. Join us tomorrow for the Sunday show. You know, if I'm being honest, I'm kind of digging the shorter TV episodes right now. And let's be honest, there's not really a whole lot going on that necessitates them doing 2-hour programs on the syndicated shows. I think an hour is perfect for all the content they're doing right now. I know that'll eventually change when they go back to the 2-hour format. But I am not going to complain about the shorter length episodes. I mean, they're still by and large not all that great. But I can tolerate short and bad as opposed to bad and interminably long. There's your "that's what she said" cliche for the week, folks. I walked right into that one. What do you say we move on to Midsouth before I talk myself into a deeper hole? So what do we have going on this week? Other than plugs for the Rock and Roll Win-A-Date contest. Well, here's the thing. There was actually plenty of stuff happening in the world of pro wrestling this week in history. A lot of it, however, was not happening on Mid-South. It was happening elsewhere in the country. In one of the bigger news bulletins they mentioned at the top of the program was Kerry Von Erich becoming the new NWA World's Heavyweight Champion after beating Ric Flair at Texas Stadium, which we obviously covered a couple years ago during the World Class Review. And it was a very monumental moment in wrestling. No doubt about that. This was odd, though. Apparently, he was scheduled to make an appearance on Mid-South this week, but... well, here's the thing. He had other commitments. That was the extent to how JR explained it. He had other commitments. Some tells me it was more like a no-show. Not saying that was the case. Just knowing Kerry's track record. Well, you never know. So there was that. Likewise, we also had some big stuff happening up in the Carolinas. Jay Youngblood had been making a lot of headway as a single star. And now keep in mind, for those of you that aren't too familiar with the early 80s timeline, Youngblood and Steamboat had been a really popular tag duo that got over like wildfire from basically mid to late 79 up until shortly after Starrcade 83 when Steamboat had retired for the first time. And while Youngblood had worked as a singles guy in places like Canada and a couple other regions in the country before he worked for Crockett, at that point he was still very young and hadn't quite broken out as a major singles star quite yet. So they played a tape of him working a squash match from the syndicated program and kind of used it as a way to promote him coming to Mid-South next week. Actually, 2 weeks. Which, for whatever reason, I'm having a hard time remember seeing Jay Youngblood in Mid-South. I know he went to Florida around this period. So, if he did work a couple dates for Watts, he definitely wasn't around long. Then again, we've also seen plenty of advertisements for certain guys that were supposed to originally come to Mid-South, and things didn't exactly pan out. So who knows? Guess we'll see. But that all eventually led us to the ring for Dr. Death Steve Williams' big return. He wrestled Steve Brinson this week. Not what you would call a technically smooth wrestling match, but I mean, you can definitely see the vast improvement with Steve every time he shows up. Y'all remember when he started back in '82, he was really bad. He was also like twice the size he was here in '84. And he's still dropping weight. He's still getting in much better shape as the months go by. God, wait until you see him in like '86. Doesn't even look like the same person. But you can tell he's starting to come into his own. The people love him, that's for sure. He got a victory with the Oklahoma Stampede in a couple minutes. Nothing more to really say about it. Then they came back to rehash the footage from last week when the Midnight Express and Butch Reed left their mark on JYD. And while the heat angle itself mainly started with Jim Cornette coming out and getting in Dog's face, calling him out for going back on his word with a 90-day suspension and putting on the mask to dress as Stagger Lee, that was all one part. But the main crux of the angle came when Butch Reed had dumped a bucket of yellow paint on him. And as JR noted here, it was a long-time rivalry reunited. While he's standing there interviewing Reed about the situation, what it really narrows down to is that Butch Reed has always been the superior black athlete in Mid-South. For years, he's been seen as the underneath to the Dog, living in his shadow, so to speak. On the top 20 list of best wrestlers in Mid-South, Butch Reed always falls at number 19. But the bottom line is he's better looking, has a better body, and has way more star power than the Dog could ever hope to have. And all Butch did last week was expose Dog's true colors. I know he's a heel. He is dead on balls accurate about the better body. That is for sure. The other things are subjective, but the physique, that is not up for debate. Butch Reed most definitely had a brick house body, especially compared to Dog in 1984. But the interview was fantastic. It's always fun listening to pissed off Hacksaw Reed. And that led directly into Reed's match with Al Scott, which Reed won in very convincing fashion. They did allot enough time to it for us to see Al Scott fuck up a standing dropkick, where he barely got 2 inches off the mat. But Reed put him away with a slingshot at the end. I'm still bummed they broke him and Landell apart as a tag team, because that shit was so fun. As we'll see later on, they got Landell back to teaming with random heels and mostly being relegated to the undercard. And then when we come back, we hear from JR at the interview booth that Jim Cornette had some pre-taped comments from earlier in the day that were quite groundbreaking. An announcement that would change the landscape of the industry as we knew it. And JR is usually not prone to hyperbole, so kind of set my hopes pretty high here. What was JC's big announcement? Did he win the lottery? Did he discover the cure to cancer? Well, no. His announcement was that due to the Midnight Express being cheated out of the Mid-South Tag Team Championships, Jim Cornette has taken it upon himself to get a rematch issued on behalf of his men. And by that, he means that his mother transferred $50,000 into his personal bank account so he could go to Grizzly Smith and get a contract written up to declare a rematch for the Rock and Roll. As of this taping, there's no official word on whether or not the rematch had been signed. But, I highly doubt Ricky and Robert are going to pass up on $50,000. Yeah, that was the big earth-shattering broadcast. JC issuing 50,000 buckaroos to get the Rock and Roll to put their tag straps on the line against the Midnights. And as Corny noted here, the Rock and Roll may have slipped over one on the Midnights a couple weeks ago, but he always gets the last laugh in the end. So some tells me Jim Cornette's got a trick up his sleeve. And it's probably more than just pocket change. We also had the Midnights working a TV squash with Mike Jackson and Lanny Poffo. Have I ever mentioned how great Boyd Pierce's scowl is whenever he gets disrespected by Jim? That fucking death glare is impeccable. This is a fun little squash. There was a really creative spot right before the Midnights took over for the Heat where Bobby's in there getting his ass kicked. And right as Lanny goes to throw a standing dropkick on Bobby, you see Dennis reach in and then pull Bobby over to his corner so that Lanny would miss it and land on the back of his head. That was great. Dennis had to have ad-libbed that on the fly. Didn't get a ton of time, but they still packed in a lot of good action. Midnights went over with the heart attack, which JR referred to as the high clothesline. You know, I guess theoretically the heart attack hadn't been established as a move by this point. Jim is correct. It is essentially a high clothesline, if you want to get technical. And then we had a really strange segment. It's Magnum TA versus The Shadow, who I attempted to do a little bit of research on and see if I could figure out who it was supposed to be under the mask. The only other name I could find out who worked as The Shadow at one point in his career was Pez Wadley. And, having watched my fair share of Pez Wadley footage, this was not him. I actually forgot about this too. There was a WWF Underneath tag team at one point that wrestled as The Shadows back in like the late 80s. But yeah, I'm not sure who this was. Might have been the same guy that worked as the mystery Third Russian several weeks ago. And we still never figured out what happened to him. He just vanished. Whoever this was, he seemed to have Magnum's number for whatever reason. He was doing some tape scouting beforehand. Just pulling from the playbook of Mr. Wrestling and slapping Magnum from the opening bell. And he actually got the upper hand on Magnum for a good portion of this match. Again, it was really strange because we've never seen this guy before, to my recollection. There's never been any kind of pre-tape or video package to explain who he was. He just shows up from out of the blue and starts beating the piss out of the number one contender to the North American title. And I'm sitting there like, is this supposed to be part of some kind of storyline that I forgot about? I mean, Magnum still won, but I mean, he really had to dig down and fight on instinct just to make a comeback on this guy. It was only after Magnum press slammed the Shadow off the top rope where he finally turned things around and fired back on him. Ended up going over with a belly-to-belly. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I can remember more about the Shadow gimmick and if it ever actually went anywhere in Mid-South. Really think about it. The fact that he just randomly showed up this week and went toe-to-toe with the top babyface contender to the North American title, it was definitely not what I was expecting. I'll say that much. Makes you wonder if there's more to it. And that brought us to Masayo Ito and Buddy Landel versus Tony Torres and John King. Again, they got poor Buddy Landel back to doing prelim stuff right now. He is not really being factored into much, now that they got Butch Reed going after the dog again. And Masayo Ito at this point, he's just kind of another name on the roster that really isn't being pushed in any meaningful programs. So, this is one of those, we have some TV time remaining, so let's get them on the show type matches. In other words, a standby. Although they did not directly refer to it as such. But the heels made short work of him. Ito won with a splash on King. And then we had a TV championship bout. Or as Boyd noted here, referring to Krusher Kruschev, the Mid-South champion of television. Which is a very roundabout way of claiming he's the TV champ. He's not wrong, just it's a very weird way of phrasing it. It's a Vince McMahon way of phrasing it. God damn it, pal, we can't call him the TV champion. He's the Mid-South champion of television. But the match is Kruschev taking on Terry Taylor. Taylor is now wrestling without the neck brace on. So he's obviously recovered well enough to have a real title bout with Kruschev this time. Remember, last time these two were scheduled to face, it was in the finals of the TV title tournament. And it was Butch Reed that ended up costing Taylor the match when he came out and pile drove Taylor on the concrete right before the bell. So it was never a fair fight to begin with. As expected, crowd was super behind Terry here. They're all out there raising up the American flags and going batshit for everything he did. And it's a decent little TV match where Taylor got worked over for a period of time. Kruschev did a nice job targeting the neck and trying to re-injure Taylor. And right as he started making his comeback and hit the flying forearm on Kruschev, it's when you see Nikolai Volkov and Butch Reed hit the ring for the DQ. As they're going to set up Taylor so Reed can come off the top of the flying shoulder block. Taylor squirms free from Volkov so that Reed accidentally knocks him over. And then it's Dr. Death who runs out to help Taylor run the heels off. This is where I wrote, finally we see an actual Mid-South TV segment worth discussing in great length. It is something we were gravely missing on the entire program up to this point. A high-intensity in-ring segment with crazy off-the-wall shit and big crowd reactions. Not to say every single solitary segment needed to be like that. But up to this point, most of the show was kind of bland and very uninteresting. And there really wasn't much to talk about outside the core of the material they aired. But this definitely helped to pick up the pace a little bit. Even though we only had like 5 minutes left in the show by the time this aired. I also don't want to neglect the post-match promo that Dr. Death cut, where he grabbed the TV title ribbon and told Kruschev that if he wants it back, then he can come claim it. But for the time being, he's going to wear it around his neck. So he's basically holding it hostage. It's a great way to get Williams involved with the Russians. Basically telling the champion, sure, you might be considered the champion on paper, but unless you have the guts to face me right now and take your trophy back, it's going to remain around my neck. So we'll see how the cowardly Russians respond. I don't care who you are. I ain't fucking with Dr. Death. Then we came back to get a quick update on the Mr. Wrestling 2 material. There's got to be an easier way to phrase that. They needed a tag team name. The Mr. Wrestlings. That's lame. Well, the first thing I noted in this pre-taped interview where Mr. Wrestling's talking about the Rock and Roll Express, he's mentioning how Ricky and Robert stole their ring gear and tried to impersonate them when they battled the Midnights a couple weeks ago. And now he wants Midsouth to take action. What repercussions would be had? To which I wrote, I want to know what repercussions are going to be had for Mr. Wrestling choosing to wear that hideous blazer for this promo. That thing gave Boyd Pierce a run for his money in terms of all-time terrible jacket designs. Where the hell did he find that thing? But he basically threatened Mid-South and said, if management doesn't do anything about the Rock and Roll, then he and Hercules will. And it kind of bled into the final match of the week where Mr. Wrestling 2 took on Bob Owens. Just a quick squash win for Hercules. He hit a body slam and then a elbow drop for the pin. And we did hear from Jim Ross right at the end of the program that we would be seeing a contract signing between the Midnights and the Rock and Roll next week to officially sanction the tag title rematch. So it'll be interesting to see if and how Mr. Wrestling and Wrestling 2 get involved. Because they're still making idle threats and saying that they want action to be taken for what the Rock and Roll did. So we'll have to see what their involvement will be in that whole deal. You know, when I got done watching the program this week, a thought kind of hit me. It really kind of looks like we're in a temporary lull period right now. You know, especially with all the fallout from the last Stampede from April, the big blow-off to the Midnight, Bill Watts, Stagger Lee showdown. You know, right now they're kind of in a holding pattern where they're trying to figure out the direction for a lot of their top guys. Just overall, the shows are fine, but not really much to write home about. And considering all the hot material we were getting, like, from January up through late April, the shows the last few weeks haven't been all that notable. Now, they do have some interesting stuff going on with the Russians and Dr. Death. You get the Midnight Rock and Roll feud, obviously. I mean, that's really taken off in the last few weeks. So they're still booking good television. It's just, I don't know. The shows are fine, but there's really not a whole lot of great length to discuss right now. Not a lot of heavy angles, not a lot of memorable promos. It's kind of been a mixed bag. So, hopefully we see a turnaround soon. And so that takes us to our second week of Texas Stadium coverage for the third annual Texas Stadium event. And as we all know, headed into the show, there were basically two matches that they were prioritizing as the main draws. There was Rick Rude defending the World Heavyweight title against a mystery opponent, so to speak. But the fans got to choose who Rude's opponent would be. Then we also had the six-man elimination strap match with the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. And we actually had some rather unfortunate news from the get-go. A last-minute change of plans. I don't entirely know when or how it happened, but at some point before the Texas Stadium event, Kevin Von Erich had dislocated his shoulder and ended up in a sling. They apparently said he'd be ready to go before the event, but, well, then he still showed up here in the sling. And Fritz made the announcement on the house mic that they would have to replace Kevin for this match. So they selected Steve Simpson to take his place. And I got to admit, not a bad option to go with, considering the track record he's been on as of late. But that kind of sucks. Kevin was obviously pissed about it. He tried to cut the promo himself, but Fritz basically pulled the mic away from him and said, "Let me handle this, son." So, well, we basically had a situation here where a Freebird Von Erich match turned into a Freebird versus makeshift Von Erich match, where only 1/3 of the group had a real Von Erich present. So the match is for the six-man tag team championships. And as per the rules they set up beforehand in the pre-tape when Fritz and Michael had that confrontation weeks ago, there were 14 lumberjacks around ringside, all of whom got to hold leather straps in order to keep everybody in the ring. Mainly the Freebirds. It is single elimination, so if a team member is pinned, submitted, or thrown over the top rope, he'd be gone from the match. Among the 14 lumberjacks, you also had Mike and Fritz as two of the critical components. We'll come back to that. I guess Kevin would have also counted, even though he wasn't officially a part of the lumberjack crew. Which is weird, because he did get involved, and it never led to a DQ. Again, we'll come back to that discussion momentarily. There is a lot to break down here, but I'll just kind of share some of my more interesting notes that I jotted down. At one point, Bill Mercer was going over the family background of Steve Simpson, talking about how he grew up with 3 older brothers and kind of followed the mold of the Von Erich family. Then he jokingly mentions how Simpson is kind of an unclaimed, unrecognized Von Erich. Remember when I talked a while back how Simpson would have actually made a credible fake Von Erich had they decided to make him Lance and instead of the black hole charisma they went with? Well, there you have it. Bill Mercer confirmed that they dropped the ball. A lot of the match was mainly the Freebirds taking the brunt of the lashings. And they really popped when Fritz got his hands on them. So, the match is kind of chugging along for a little bit until things break down with all 6 guys early on. And they do a spot where Hayes and Gordy double-team Kerry and lay him out with a clothesline, which in turn eliminates him from the match. And that was probably the most shocking thing about the whole thing, seeing Kerry get eliminated that early. But as they went into round 2, it left the babyfaces with a numbers disadvantage. We came back with Lance flogging shit in the ring. I wrote that down. That's probably the best way I can describe it. He was flogging it. The heels beat on him for a little bit. And then we get a really interesting situation develop at ringside with the Lumberjacks. There's a point where Hayes gets yanked down to the floor and restrained while Fritz and Kevin go after him with a strap. And because David Manning was assigned to basically officiate all the Lumberjacks and keep everybody in order, he actually steps up and ejects Fritz and Kevin from ringside, since they had already interfered multiple times during the match already. And that was like one of the very first times I can recall ever seeing a babyface referee get into it with one of the other babyfaces, but still sounding rational and making a decision that doesn't necessarily benefit the good guy. Because he's right. Fritz and Kevin had already gotten involved multiple times here, and it was never called for. They are clearly biased when it comes to wanting to strap the Freebirds. Mostly Michael Hayes. Even if morally they're not wrong for wanting to do so. So David basically stepped in and said, "This is ridiculous. We're not having this. Fritz, you're gone. Kevin, you're gone. Hit the showers." So after they're canned, it led to Steve Simpson making a short comeback on the heels. And right before the next break segment, you see Hayes try to cut off Simpson with a sidewalk slam. And right as he goes for a cocky pinfall attempt, Simpson rolls through and ends up eliminating Hayes. So now it is even Steven as we come back from break. By the way, can I just say that Terry Gordy was on fire in this match? God, his shit looks so great. I'm not kidding. This was some of the best work I've ever seen Gordy put in. He was just firing on all cylinders. And they ended up very quickly eliminating Simpson when we come back. So it left Lance to fend for himself against Gordy and Roberts. It was 2 Freebirds, 1 Von Erich, and I don't know how many cups. That was a joke my music theory teacher made in undergrad. I thought it was funny at the time. So, well, the closing moments basically see Lance dropkick Gordy over the top rope to eliminate him. And then he very quickly turned around and put the claw hold on Buddy to pin him down and win the match for his team. Quite the miraculous comeback there. I think out of everybody here, Lance worked the least amount of in-ring time. Yet he still scored the ultimate pinfall to win the match. Overall, it was really fun, though. I mean, there have been so many Freebird Von Erich matches over the years. I kind of enjoyed this like I did the penalty box match a while ago. It had that same type of chaotic atmosphere, but they told a great story. It was never boring. The people were super into everything. It was a overbooked hot mess at various points, but you can get away with doing that here. And bearing in mind the show only aired 2 matches this week, because this is so multifaceted, you needed to devote plenty of time to it. Although it is kind of interesting that Steve Simpson technically was a part of the winning team, but I think Kevin would still be recognized as 1/3 of the champions. Or who knows, maybe Kevin is perfectly okay with Simpson representing the Von Erich family as a representative of the six-man champions. Again, a lot going on in this match. Definitely a lot of overbooked insanity to it. But, like I said, if you're going to do this kind of stuff on a big stage, you may as well go out. And this definitely worked in the Texas Stadium. And that left us with Rick Rude and Bruiser Brody in their title match. Brody had been hand-selected as the challenger via fan mail. And it's also important to remember the rules now when it comes to the World Championship. The title can change hands on a disqualification or count-out, should the champion try and resort to cheating in order to leave with the belt, which was mainly a rule instituted because of the heels. And even before the bell rang, as soon as Mark Lawrence made that announcement, my immediate thought was, yeah, Brody's definitely getting disqualified here. I mean, they were blatantly telegraphing it. When it comes to judging the match overall, I guess it kind of depends on what your expectations were for a Bruiser Brody Rick Rude match. I thought it was just okay. Not really anything you were going to remember a week or two after seeing it air. I mean, the big angle didn't really come into play until the end, where Percy tried to shove Brody's foot off the bottom rope when Rude had him down in a pinning predicament. And then as Brody went to chase Percy around the ring and trying to get his hands on him, they actually had a funny spot where Brody's holding onto Percy's collar with one hand while he's fending off Rude with the other hand. So even as Rude is attempting to save his manager, he's still getting his ass beat. And so, well, it basically led to Brody tossing Rude over the top rope to the floor in an attempt to keep Percy sequestered in the ring. So he gets disqualified. And then as the heels attempted to escape through the crowd, Brody went to give chase and kept brawling with Rude until the grappler ran out. And, I don't know what else happened. I think Brody got the better of him. Again, there really wasn't much to say about it. I don't believe anybody expected Brody was going to leave Texas Stadium as the champion. Yeah, the DQ finish admittedly was kind of lame, especially considering that Brody really never had a reason to throw Rude over the top rope. Yeah, he was trying to go after Percy, but why did he need to intentionally disqualify himself? Did he figure he was about to get DQ'd anyway for pulling Percy into the ring? I don't know. Again, not a bad match, just nothing I would say you need to go out of your way to seek out. Overall, the show was definitely worth a watch, simply for that six-man tag. That was a tremendously fun segment. And so far, Texas Stadium's kind of been an unexpected Steve Simpson showcase. Last week, getting the win in the gauntlet match with the Great Kabuki. Then a week later, he's part of the winning team in a six-man against the Freebirds. We talked about this before, but they're definitely making a concerted effort at getting him over as a top babyface. I guess the only thing left at this point is the mud match between Sunshine and Missy, right? I hope to God it's not a false advertisement. If we don't see that air next week, I'll be extremely disappointed. I mean, 2 matches, but by and large, they were the 2 main attractions for the initial card, so I'm not going to complain about it. And on that note, we will wrap it up there and reconvene this coming Monday for a Retro Raw recap. Thank God. Not thank God as in, oh great, I get to review Raw. It's thank God that I don't have to talk about anything else. Might actually have some downtime. But on that note, I always appreciate the viewers that come back to check out the show every week, and I guess I'll catch you all on Monday. Take care, all. Peace out.